Oh, here we go. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us live. This is the Is Content Theory Right for Me session. You may have seen on LinkedIn, and maybe if you're on my email list, that I've been talking about content theory quite a bit. Lately, this is a course that I've been developing over the last couple years to make sure that I can put out there the stuff that I've learned over the course of my nearly 20-year career and building out 10-figure category defining content marketing programs. Um, let's just jump right into it. Uh, Feel free to, by the way, a little bit of housekeeping. Feel free to use the chat as we go along. I highly encourage it. I'll be taking questions at the very end. There's quite a bit to go through right now, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So we'll burn through. And when we're looking at any of these individual sections, I'll make sure to scroll up through the chat later on to answer those specific ones. All right, we're going to jump straight into it. So, main question we're here to ask today is content theory right for? The first question that I've been hearing a lot of right now is what is content theory specifically? So, content theory is the study of the fundamental elements of effective content. It's a set of rules to create, analyze, and interpret category defining content programs. Very much in the same vein as music theory or film theory, there are individual components that can make up something that is compelling. And that's something that I feel has been lacking in this space for many, many years. Um, why does it exist? Uh, well, if you are familiar with the State of Discontent report, this was something that we had looked to quantify in the content marketing space. What people were feeling was one of the challenges with their content creating questions, right? What are the biggest challenges with content creation today? And we can see here differentiating content, creating the right content for our audience, and creating quality content are some of the main concerns here. And I think part of that has to do with, what I'm saying here is we've been told to provide value and be engaging, but they're so vague and they lack definition that what does that actually mean, right? And how do we start to analyze this when we start looking at other stuff and pull out those components that might make something engaging? That's really what content theory is about. Now, who am I? I'm going to assume that some of you are familiar with my work, but in case you're not, I'm Tommy Walker. I'm the founder of the Content Studio. I work with Fortune 1000 companies and mid-market B2B SaaS startups. Before that, I was the editor in chief, the first marketing hire at Shopify Plus, global editor in chief at QuickBooks, and I've consulted with brands you can see here like GoDaddy, LinkedIn, Twitch, and Vimeo. Also, before I ever got into marketing, I was a classically trained actor. I went to a conservatory for this and spent many, many years diving into technique. And when I got into marketing, I thought to myself, what is brand development but character development? What is market analysis but script analysis? And how can we take those things and read between the lines of the information that we have available to us to then create compelling characters that can chew up the scenery wherever they show up. And one of the foundational principles of acting, right? There are two questions that you need to ask. In acting, it's what does your character want and what does your character need, right? And when we start to break these down into our individual components, right? What a want is and what a need is, they're two very, very different things. Right. So wants are extrinsic motivations. They're known to the character. Specific to them, it moves the plot forward. So in our world, that might be something that people search for. They want to achieve a goal of some sort. And this is the reason why we click on things. It might satisfy some sort of want that we have in that moment. The question is what do they need? And this is often the thing when I look at content in the B2B space overall, it's the needs um, that are missing, right? They're intrinsic gaps, they're unknown or ignored by the characters, they're universal lessons to the audience, and they drive the character through their arc. So this is the foundation of any story that we look at in popular media. This is what we see. So for example, right, if we look at the Matrix, Thomas Anderson wants to know what the Matrix is. Woody wants to be Andy's favorite toy. Ralph wants a medal, right? They believe that if they achieve these things, if they get these goals, they're going to have some sort of satisfaction or fulfillment. But what they need is a completely different thing. They have completely different lessons that they need to learn. So Neo needs to accept that he is the one. Woody needs to accept that he needs to embrace Buzz in his new world so he can be a more satisfied and complete character. Ralph needs to accept that labels do not define him as a character, right? One of the things in Wreck-It Ralph, I love this movie. I think it is the most perfect, structurally made movie of all time. Um, one of the things, one of the line that's said very early on is labels don't define you. Good, bad doesn't matter. Just because you're a bad guy doesn't mean you're a bad guy. This is something that we all can learn, right? Our job titles don't define who we are. Some of us need to accept that we are a little bit special. Some of us need to accept change. And this is something that is really important when it comes to content development overall, is how can we give people what they want but also deliver a little bit extra on what they need. And we do this obviously through audience research. Now, the thing that I don't like about a lot of the content that's out there about audience research is that I think it's very vague. When we looked at the State of Discontent report, we found that the majority of people were saying they weren't doing their audience research nearly enough. I think part of that, people either don't have enough time, it's not a priority from their leadership, or more importantly, it's too vague of a definition, right? I know that I was a career actor, like I said, before I ever got into this. And because of that, there was no formal training on market research. What does that even mean? It's such an amorphous term, um, that even if we're doing it, are we really doing it best? And are we able to apply those insights even further? So this is really the foundation of what content theory is about, is doing the audience research first to understand what customers or the readers or listeners or viewers, what have you, what they want and what they need, right? I started to develop this framework that I felt was really important overall, that has given me a 360-degree view of whatever a market is. And then there are methodologies that I use to start breaking them down, to read between the lines, if you will, and develop a character for our brand. So here's the 8 layers of market research process. So this is a super high overview. It is something I go a lot deeper in the course itself. But here are the 8 layers, the high level overview. So one is you, right? These are the internal conversations you have with employees about what brand means to them. So brand, this is a framework that is taken from Kevin Lee and Shannon Deep of Camp Bonfire. They break brand down into 4 different categories. There's actually a 5th one here too, but brand is actually 4 different categories of things that make up what the overall brand is. So what is your category narrative? What are your views on the overall category of which your company exists? What is your product narrative? So what are the features and benefits of that product, and how are they different from everybody else? And the different uses that you might have of them too. What is your persona, or who is the persona that you're going after? What are your customers? What makes your customers different from other people's customers? What's that special common bond that they have with each other that really makes them somebody different? A company I think does this really well is ConvertKit, right? Or now Kit. They very much focus their product on creators. And for their product, they say, we don't need a ton of extra features. We have just the features that you need. And we do that because in the email marketing space, a lot of the different companies that are out there are robust, but maybe too robust for our specific persona. And then there's culture. Now, there are 2 ways that I like to look at culture. One is the culture of inside the company. So what is it like to work there? We see this a lot with different employer brands, where they are really trying to encourage their culture of, this is what we believe in, this is how we operate within the world, these are our missions. But then the other part of that is, what is the effect of the culture that they want to have on the business, right? Or of their overall category of which they're in. So at Shopify Plus, when I was there, we were very brand new to the market. And the part of the brand that we wanted to have the part of the thing that we wanted to do was tearing down the enterprise. That was our main sort of guiding principle. And we wanted to build a culture of businesses, growing businesses, mid-market businesses specifically, who were able to move quickly and adjust on the fly because they had a product that was able to uh, allow them to do that, right? And these four categories of brand, they can play really well into each other and start to shine through any content that you start to create once you have these in mind, right? So we're going to move on. Right, we've got brand. We've got your owned audience. So through audience interviews with your customers, you want to discover what they want, what they need, but more importantly, what are their strategies for success? What do they value and what do they fear? Once we understand the commonalities between them, we're able to start finding a voice between reflecting the owned audience and our narratives. And somewhere in there is where a brand voice starts to come from, right? And this applies to all types of content. And this is really where we start to develop a voice, right? When we talk about have a strong POV or develop a strong voice, this is really where that starts to come from because we're trying to speak to a very specific type of person and we are aligning our brand values with what they value in the world. And we can speak to those fears and we can help them find their strategies of success, right? So this is what we're looking at with the owned audience. When we start looking at our direct competitors, right? What are their products, features, benefits? How are they communicating these things? What's their positioning? And how and where are they showing up? What topics are they covering? What topics aren't they covering? And what do other people have to say about them? When we do our competitor analysis, what are the things, and you can take this with you, one of the things that I really try to look at is what's everybody saying and how do those cancel out? How do we cancel those things out? So if everybody is, putting out their logos of, I work with McDonald's and JetBlue and uh, Sony, right? And somebody else says, well, I work with Burger King and Delta and uh, Bose. In a customer's mind, those things cancel each other out, right? Well, when we look at competitors, we have to start looking at what are the things that cancel each other out and then what's left after that. And this applies to all types of writing, right? This applies to all topics, that applies to how we approach each topic and everything else, right? We can use this as a way to start looking at what's left after all of the things that are similar, canceling each other out. Once we start looking at canceling out everything that everybody is doing the same, there's not a lot left afterwards, which gives us a really solid opportunity, which I'll talk about how to leverage in just a minute here. We also look at search competitors. So what kinds of businesses are showing up in search? Not all are going to be in your product category. What topics are they covering? How are they covering them? And are there complementary opportunities? The way that I like to think about search competitors too is if they're not direct competitors, then they're attracting the attention of the people that we are trying to get the attention of. So does that mean we have opportunities for strategic distribution and strategic partnerships that we can start to algorithm proof, if you will, our content by making those connections and building out these partnerships and showing up in these areas where our customers are also showing up, right? Lots of opportunities there once we start thinking about it a little bit differently. Adjacent ecosystem. So this is very similar. Apps, agencies, I like to think about. Uh, um, Also conferences, right? Who else is going after the same customer? And what are they talking about? And how do they communicate and position themselves? And again, is this an opportunity where we could position ourselves in that ecosystem as well, right? Industry news. What are the topics that are always being covered? What are the developments that are affecting everybody in the industry? What are the developments that affect your specific subset? And are your competitors showing up here? One of the things we talk about in the full program is actually I share some research that shows just how much a customer's preference can change even if when you're showing up where their competitors are not. Influencers, this is fairly straightforward, right? Who's driving the conversation forward? Are there emerging voices? What's the common advice? Who's giving it, right? Influencers are obviously driving the conversation forward, and we're seeing this a little bit more in the B2B space, that there are more B2B influencers that are showing up. Are there partnership opportunities there? Can we align our messages with them? Are we able to build them into our distribution network? So anybody who's familiar with the State of Discontent report, um, you may have seen that Rand Fishkin had shared it out, right? That was planned well in advance because I had worked with him to help develop the premise of that and see if it was something that they would be interested in sharing, right? This is very often the case with a lot of influencer marketing is can we develop things together to then distribute later on? And how do you hedge your bets against failure? That's kind of one of the things that we're looking at when we look at influencers and how we start to apply this information later. I try to keep track of all of this stuff in real time, right? So one of the things that we saw in the State of Discontent report was that the people who are doing their audience research daily, they have higher levels of buy-in, they're more satisfied, or they're more creatively satisfied, they're more confident in their voice and tone, et cetera, et cetera. And I think part of the reason why we're not doing our audience research more often is that we don't have a really solid method of bringing that to us on a daily basis. So, how do we start to use automations? And this is something that I teach. How do we use automations to bring that information that is going on in our market to the places that we're already spending our time to then have a really solid pulse on what's going on in the industry? Right. So, those are the 8 layers. And this is the effect of, these are just some of the effects on audience research. One of the things that we found in the State of Discontent report was that people are more likely to be bought in the more often they're doing audience research. So we can see this extremely bought in category, right? The levels of buy-in are much higher and they're doing their research much higher. If we go to that skeptical area, right? This very last one, they're the ones who are saying they're the ones who are saying they're not doing their audience research nearly enough, right? So the breakdown is very clear there. The more audience research you do, the more often the better off your chances of getting buy-in are, right? And here's the other thing, and this was one that was really surprising to me. Not really surprising at all, actually. Confidence in voice and tone, where you have more people who are extremely confident when they're doing their audience research frequently, and when they do their audience research less frequently, we can see the confidence level starts to go down, right? And across the survey, I don't have any other graphs to show this right now, but across the survey, we started to see more discontent with creative satisfaction. The less frequent they did audience research, we see less satisfaction with the quality of work. We see less satisfaction with compensation, with career, this moment in career. Every vector of the survey where the audience research wasn't done nearly enough or infrequently, it had a negative effect across the board. And I believe, again, that part of that has to do with not having frameworks to do that audience research, even if something like you're not allowed to talk to customers, there are still 5 other layers that you can start to look at, or 6 other layers you can start to look at to get information that maybe helps you make your case a little bit later on down the road, right? So how do we find gaps in the content that your competitors missed? And now there's a few ways that we look at that. We as readers, as video people, as searchers in general, we think in narratives, especially if we're trying to learn something. So one of the things that I did one of the things that I do is actually think about how content exists narratively for our viewers. And the reason for that is I want people opening more tabs. I want people being late to their next meeting. And I want them to be so engrossed in the stuff that we're doing because we're constantly delivering on those wants and needs, but also showing them what could be coming next, either directly or indirectly through the content that we create. So right here is a blog post or something I asked ChatGPT to help me out with. Let's say Frodo from the Lord of the Rings was preparing for his journey to destroy the One Ring by reading blog posts. What are the titles of the blog posts they might read and correspond with? Right? And we can see these are the narrative points that come up, the main narrative points for the Lord of the Rings. Now, especially if we're optimizing for search, what will often happen is somebody might come in through here, right? They might come in through the choosing your companions wisely, forming trustworthy teams. Once they get the information they need, then they're going to go bounce off and maybe they're going to try to get the rest of this information somewhere else. Maybe they don't look for it at all. Maybe we aren't telling them what they didn't know they needed. right? So if we're thinking about things a little bit more narratively, we can always start to, from a macro level, start to foreshadow what comes next, but also reference back to things that we did before. And on a sentence by sentence level, start to get people engaged with this and build up a sense of what comes next and what came before. And again, this is something that I teach on a very, very deep level on how we can do this. But the idea is we're thinking narratively as people, and how can we build up that sense of narrative within our within the people who are reading and interacting with our stuff, right? So this is stuff that's probably not going to be a lot of surprise for you, right? You can do the organic keywords, you can look at organic competitors. These are the people that show up in organic search, right? And you can do a gap analysis in a tool like Ahrefs, which is what I'm using here. But that's not what gets exciting. What gets exciting, and this is how I approach this primarily, right? Here's what I like to do. I'll take the titles I'll use Ahrefs to grab titles. And then what I'll do is tell ChatGPT here, I'm going to give you a list of the blog post titles. First thing I want you to do is categorize these titles in a way that would showcase the reader's journey to solve a much larger problem that extends beyond the single article, right? You can see I've done this with Kit, pulled out a ton of their article titles. And what we've done when we go down here a little bit more is they start to categorize these from a narrative perspective. So getting started, building an online presence, monetizing your content, scaling systems, right? And what I then do is ask them to find gaps in these. If a person, what lives in between the lines, monetizing your email and newsletter audience, leveraging more advanced tools from automation, monetizing through high value offers, we can start to build on this information that we had before, what came before it. And now with that, um, we can start filling in those topics that nobody else is talking about. And more importantly, we might not just be going after search content here, but we can be filling in those gaps where people need this. It might not be something that they know that they want, but they need to become a customer or to have a more complete set of knowledge on the information out there, right? And this is why most differentiation strategies fail, is we're not seeing what those gaps are in the topics that people are talking about. But more importantly, we're not communicating ideas. And I really like to make a differentiation between those things. There's topics and there's ideas. If we are covering the same topics, we're not communicating new ideas in a lot of cases for whatever the best practices are that have been put out there for the last 20 years or so. We're not communicating those ideas, but more importantly, we're not communicating those ideas because we're not really trying to look at new angles on that. And the question is what even makes a new idea in this space, right? So here's Aristotle. And one of the things that I look at with what Aristotle has talked about is rhetoric. Now, rhetoric in a lot of definitions, and his definition is the art of persuasion. But what I like to think of rhetoric is as the art of making choices, right? And what we have here is logos, pathos, and ethos. So logos, how does this appeal to logic? Pathos is how does this appeal to emotion? And ethos is how does this appeal to authority? So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a landing page from a competitor of one of my previous clients, and we're going to use this as a lens to analyze how they are doing, how they are appealing to the logic. So we're going to look at this through the one specific lens of how are they appealing to logic, and we're looking at their strengths, right? So in this case, they do a really solid job of using statistical evidence, right? And they have a really solid feature list. They have a detailed description of their features, and it addresses those operational needs. So logically, these are the reasons why I might want to sign up for this product, right? Their weaknesses, however, they lack a comparative analysis, right? There's no direct comparison with any other competitors. So if there's a question that they might have on how does this compare to some of my other direct direct competitors or the other options that are out there, there's none of that available. Plus, these guys are making really broad claims. So, without detailed support, leads readers to doubt the specificity and applicability of the benefits. Now, I know that this is specific to landing pages, but we can look at this from a much broader lens. If you're in blogging or if you're in doing video, if you're doing podcasts, we can start to look at this across all types of content when we're looking at everything in a macro lens and go, okay, what are their strengths and weaknesses in how they appeal to logic in their things, right? We start to make note of that, and then we start to find what those gaps are. Pathos, how does this appeal to emotions, right? We're going to look at the same exact thing again, but now we're going to look at it from the emotional connective standpoint, right? So it skillfully taps into the emotional frustrations of administrative burdens, and it promises regaining time and lifestyle and passion for martial arts because that's what they were, right? But they overpromise, and this is the case with a lot of different companies, is they overpromise and they will make it seem like their solution is going to be the biggest, best thing out there. But we already know that it's not going to be the panacea. And they also have a uniform emotional tone. So it's constantly optimistic, which might not resonate because it's not giving that nuance and depth of what the emotional aspect of that can be. And we can start to codify this later on when we start seeing what everybody's doing. Now we can start to create a set of rules for ourselves. And if you're familiar with my content code, that's exactly what that is. Where how are we codifying ways that we can address these things specifically so we can be different, right? How can we be very different, and how can we get that at a very fundamental and basic level or foundational level, right? And then ethos, how does this appeal to authority? Now, again, we go back to this and we can see they do a really good job of leveraging their expertise and experience, right? They highlight that they are developed by individuals with direct martial arts school management. They have really solid testimonials. So their authority, their sense of authority on this, they have some really good strengths. But what are their weaknesses? Well, their testimonials are generic, right? They're just talking about how the company is awesome, how they've done really awesome things. But if we're looking at how do we make these testimonials very specific, then can we look at those testimonials and just say, hey, this works really well. This particular feature is what helps my business, right? Also, they have unspecified qualifications. So while it says that they are they're all martial arts people, it doesn't speak very well to what those specific titles are, how long have they been for, all of that, right? So we can start to pull this stuff apart. And if we were to say, okay, we're going to include testimonials even inside a blog post or in a video, right? We're not going to look at that from the perspective of, hey, let's just talk about how awesome we are. We're going to talk about specific features. So people who are in that evaluation mode are looking at those specific things and starting to ask, like, hey, is this going to be right for me? Well, this person says yes. This person says yes, right? Looking at very specific things. And specificity is really what it's all about in all of the content that we create. Again, I know we're looking at landing pages here, but we can look at this on a macro lens of all content and start to see how they all approach this and make note, and then ultimately create a document, which I call the code, that addresses those things. And how do we do that very differently? So here's, I promised real life examples on how I've done this in the past, right? And this was an example from Shopify Plus, right? So to set the stage at what Shopify Plus was going on at the time is we were competing. We could not compete on product, right? Enterprise e-commerce, it's very silly now to think about, but cloud e-commerce was not being taken seriously in the enterprise back when I was there. More importantly, it was the impression of people in the market that if you were to be serious, you needed to have on-premise software to make that happen. And even crazier was that Shopify Plus, from a features perspective, didn't have anything different. We had dedicated customer service, lower transaction fees, and the ability to customize your checkout, like the bare bones minimum from a differentiation on product. And my job at the time was to answer the question of what's the difference between Shopify Plus and the rest of the market, and what's the difference between Shopify and Shopify Plus, right? Very, very interesting challenge. So when I was looking at the entire market, I was going, okay, how is everybody approaching certain common like formats that we kind of have to cover, right? So this is an example from Magento. This is how they approached all of their white papers. You can see it's very boring. It's very literally black and white. Um, and there's not a lot going on here. So what I did, right, and here's something else that they did. They were also doing the standard company X works with company Y and see Z results uh, case studies, right? There's a place for this, but not where we were at that point in time. So I asked, what if we focused on the person doing the job, not the companies that were working together, but the individuals that were working on the job, and treated it more like a Rolling Stone interview, right? So in this case, when I started to hire for that too, right, I hired an Emmy Award winning journalist who was able to create these case studies that really dug deep into the psychology of the person behind the scenes. So this is one of my favorite examples of how Ripped Apparel turned $3,000 into $4 million. The company X works with company Y and sees Z results. Narrative of this would be uh, the founder got a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from the CTO saying their server room is on fire. So they switched to Shopify Plus, and now they can rest easy at night knowing that their servers are going to be safe and secure. What the actual story was that he got this call at 3 o'clock in the morning on the night of his bachelor party, which sets a very, very different tone for what the overall story is going to be. And it makes it much more realistic and relatable to anybody else who has been in some type of position. Now, we can still talk about how company X works with company Y and sees the results, but now we're adding a lot more nuance to that. And because we were growing at the time, we were able to publish a new case study every week because we had more access to our customer base than the companies that had to go through this entire process of doing that. So even though they may have had more case studies, we were releasing them more regularly, which gives a very different impression of how the company is growing and what everybody's doing. So there's kind of that strategic level of how we're approaching that content as well. And this was the thing, is if we also couldn't compete on features, which everybody was using for their lead gen, all of their lead generation material was about how awesome their features were, which again, everybody had the same features. So that was not really very much of a differentiator. If we couldn't compete on features, we're going to compete on knowledge, was kind of my mantra. So instead of doing white papers that talked about individual features, I said, we're going to look at this. We're going to create an industry report or a series of 8 industry reports that projects out the next 5 years of where e-commerce was going. And then we hired, you can see here, we hired an agency with a print magazine experience that allowed us to lay this out more like a coffee table reader, right? And less like your standard white paper. Now, what was really interesting about this too is that we had a an events team, and when we launched the report, we didn't just put it out there into the world. We had this hardbound. We had it something that we could use as a sales asset. So we had sales enablement, and our salespeople could send it out to their prospects. So it was no longer just a PDF in somebody's inbox that could get ignored. But more importantly, we did a launch party in New York where we invited our potential agency partners to come so we could smooth them and get new agency deals, which ended up becoming the agency side of the business. The partner side of Shopify Plus ended up becoming about half of the company's revenue. But this was an opportunity for us to showcase the content that my team had created and work in collaboration with another team to put something out here. And this was actually a super cool party too, because you can see we've got the print magazine here. But also it was an art gallery in the front and a speakeasy in the back. So we had a really cool party. We set a really cool vibe and gave the impression of this is who we are as a company. And this is how we're thinking about the future, right? So we were communicating multiple things at very different levels, but we were also differentiating content or distinguishing our content, which there is a difference between the two. Um, but we were doing that in a way that really communicated who we are in the market instead of very very specific tone. And now years later, right, I left Shopify Plus at the end of 2017. Years later, they're still using a version of this strategy, which has generated them billions of dollars, which is crazy to me. But it's something that I laid the foundation in the very beginning, and it's still being used today. So the other part that I like to think about when it comes to these content pieces overall is how can we create durable, repeatable strategies that are always going to work or always on. And this is one of them, right? Moving forward here, right? So here's a framework that I use for content that I think really drives. This is a method that I use. It's called the Better Brief, right? And I look at how people are motivated. Again, this is something that I go very deep into in the course. I look at the ghosts, so what's happened in somebody's past that leads them to believe a lie. What's the truth that they need to accept? Again, we look at wants and needs. What kind of endings do they get? Which is something that we talk about a lot deeper. What helps them feel more competent? What helps them feel more related to other people? How do we make them feel more autonomous, right? What's the overall thing that they're trying to achieve? What's the overall thing that's getting them back? And then what are the levels of conflict? So there are 3 levels of conflict. And I don't know if you've subscribed to my newsletter, you may have you may have seen me talk about this before, right? But there are extrapersonal conflicts, forces of nature, roles in society, all external conditions, things that we are not able to control at all. There's personal conflicts, so relationships with specific people. And then there's interpersonal conflicts, conflicts with our mind, our body, or emotion. So here is an example. I want you to really think about a time where maybe this was a challenge for you. Did you ever have to deal with a down economy, a terrible boss, and some crippling self doubt? Right? Instantly, when we have these conflicts put into place, um, that's where a story really starts to come from. That's where uh, it really is. That's where it really is something that becomes a challenge that we're trying to overcome, and something that we can start setting the stakes for when it comes to our viewers, our listeners, our readers, etc. And once we start setting the stakes within an intro, if we're able to use these as an intro to whatever content that we're creating, now we're really connecting very early on, just by showing that we know the state of the state of the world in our content. So this is something that I think is really important, something you can take away with you right now, um, to make the content a lot better. So what is content theory? Content theory is a live 5-day cohort-based training program that explores the fundamental elements of effective content. This is something that I teach. I'm very passionate about. I care about it a lot. And uh, it is something, these are the other things that we will cover off in the course, right? So obviously we'll go deeper into the 8-layer market research process. I have better ways to think about how we talk to customers. So I mentioned before, what do they value, what do they fear, and what are their strategies for success? Talk about how we can take that and create stronger through lines in how we talk to our customers. There are multiple creative development frameworks that we use. I go a lot deeper into the rhetoric stuff. We also have how to build a manifesto, so we can lay a really solid foundation for our overall way that we approach content. We talk about how to hedge our bets. We use behavioral psychology framework to understand the listeners, readers, viewers' wants and needs, so we can meet them where they are. And overall, if you are in an in-house organization or with your clients, we also talk about it. I have methods of managing change. That's the 5th day of the program. And if you will indulge me for just a moment here, I would like to share with you a testimonial from one of my former students.
Now that we've been with Google for 25 plus years developing content, I mean, there has to be a better way. This is like the underpinning of like how this industry-wide conversation really needs to be. So like anybody who comes in as a content manager, frankly, this should be the standard going forward for the next 25 years. No one is talking about it in this way. I was looking to receive a sort of end to end crash course and a reliable, bankable framework from someone who is a veteran in the industry who I could learn from, take some of those theoretical ideas and maybe adapt and apply them. I came out with a lot more than that. So for me, my biggest aha moment had to be on day one. Right when we jumped into customer research, the moment we jumped in, we hit the ground running with some of the most dense ideas and topics and pieces of information. And of course, you've structured it in such a way that everything builds really beautifully on itself. So it's like the broad, big, chunky stuff, and then it gets narrower and narrower as you move towards application, which is not to say there still isn't theory across all 4 to 5 days, but just that we get an opportunity to apply some of that theory and then move on and create a new set of like understanding and learning when we're applying it. And now that I'm done, I'm looking forward to a part two, quite frankly. I'm looking forward to taking some of the frameworks that you've actually provided for us and applying it to our teams. You've started me off in such a good spot. Now, how can I add some of that creativity and make it even more robust? Look, everyone says a lot of buzzwords, and as marketers, we tend to be after a certain amount of time kind of jaded by it. If you're looking for the quick wins, you're looking for the, aha moments, you're looking for workable frameworks, you're looking for guided knowledge, all that stuff is in this course. But what you'll really receive is something I think you almost can't. It's invaluable. It's so difficult to put a true value to it because it's a feeling, and the feeling is believing in your craft again. Get into this course. Get into this course because it'll provide you everything it's promising, but it will help you look at content in the way that content, frankly, deserves to be looking. But when you come out of it, you'll realize it is B2B's moment. I'm feeling refreshed again. I'm feeling like this industry is possible. Like we're not just selling, degrees of differentiation. When you walk out of this, you'll be well positioned to start being really excited again about telling your brand and product stories. Because I promise you, they're there. You just don't yet know how to look for them. And then once you look for them, how to actually develop stuff around them. And then how to talk about that. The differences that I've observed from frameworks of storytelling within your course and when I compare it to what's out there in the industry is specificity. And it has to be specificity. If you're trying to create content at scale, you need something that's really specific, really usable, adaptable across a number of content types. I can take these ideas and apply them to email marketing. I can take these ideas and apply them to case studies, lead magnets. Like the format doesn't matter, but what's being said, how to say it, how to dig in and find those hidden messages, and then actually giving you the techniques, again, giving you the techniques for editorial storytelling. That's just not happening. That is something that your course does, is it doesn't just leave you at the high level stuff, and it doesn't denigrate the high level stuff either. It takes storytelling as a broad idea. It then supports that with really unique and frankly, I haven't seen people talking about it in this way, wrapping up copywriting principles with storytelling. And then it goes further down and says, okay, now here are these, precepts and tenets of storytelling. Here's what it looks like in action. So here's kind of the prep work that you're going to have to do to develop that story and find those ideas and generate those ideas. Okay, and now let's take it a step further. Nobody's taking it to the third step, let alone the fourth step. That fourth step of what does this mean for your content creators? What does this mean for your editorial team? Right? How do you take all of that stuff and drill it down to individuals who need to use it? You are going to come away with like real resources, real assets, again, that you can immediately throw to your editorial team and then start to develop from there and see, again, what works, what doesn't, what do your clients like, what do they not. Nobody is giving you the actual techniques around editorial storytelling. They'll just throw that around and they'll even maybe support you with the theory around that. But how does it get done at scale? Forget answering that. No one's actually giving you that. That's what this course gives you.
If you want to know more about content theory, if you want to join the next cohort, there are only 18 seats left. So this is the time to do it. Email me, Tommy@thecontentstudio.com. Hopefully I will hear from you and see you on the other side. All right, bye.